Good evening. Yeah, it is a good evening, isn't it? Yeah, it's a good evening to listen to some poetry. I am Dr. Kimberly Macquarie, and I'm the Director of Education here at the Dalí Museum and the co-director of the Innovation Labs. And I have the honor and pleasure of kicking off poetry tonight, and I welcome you here to the Dalí Museum, and of course, in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, bienvenidos al Museo Dalí. We're so happy to have you here. And I also have the honor of introducing Helen Pruitt Wallace. Helen Pruitt Wallace, of course, is the former Poet Laureate of St. Pete, but she's also an amazing poet, educator, and of course, we're so proud to have her as one of our board members. She is going to cue up the amazing lineup of poetry we have for tonight, and I thought in the spirit of being here at the Dalí, and of course, Dalí and Lorca were longtime friends, I thought I would start us off tonight with a quote from Lorca. And he says, "La poesía no quiere adeptos, quiere amantes." Poetry doesn't want followers, it wants lovers. And I don't know about you, but I'm ready to be a lover right now. So in that spirit, I'll pass it over to Helen.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you. I hope, were you able to hear what I said? Okay. Thank you, Samaya. So I will read one poem. It's an older poem. I had a brother who died several years ago when he was 25, and he was passionate about skydiving. That was his thing. And he went up in a plane with several other skydivers, and the plane went down. And he was just, just an amazing guy. And he just, his birthday was just a couple days ago. So in his honor, I wanted to read this poem, even though it is an older poem now. And I think the only thing you need to know about it, it's written in two parts. And the second part is called Mingan Bride, Afterlife Marriage. And a Mingan bride is a bride that a Chinese couple will find for their son, or I suppose could be daughter, after they've died, and the son or daughter has also died, and they allow them to get married even after their death, and that's called a Mingan bride. So there's a reference to that in here. And you'll also hear a reference to flying, which is the connection to skydiving. And when they have a Mingan bride, they typically bury the two side by side. So, Epilogues for a Brother, from Mark Pruitt, 1960 to 1985. Rewriting the last flight. You do it like the hero in the movie, eject just before the plumed crash, your white chute floating like milkweed toward some grassy field. And there, a girl, her black dog, maybe tossing pebbles in a stream or gathering fistfuls of daisies, drops her wicker basket on the ground and races for the sun's pearled glare. She finds you in a puddle of silk, dazed, bruised barely, but enough to knead her soft shoulder as you hobble to her house for soup and the buoyant rest of your life. 2, Mingan bride, afterlife marriage. Assume the rest of your life doesn't happen. Take this burnt offering of cash and to cruise the netherworld, a paper model of a Cessna SE, like those along the Yellow River Canyon seeking dead wives for dead sons to bury them side by side. I, too, would offer gold, 10,000 yuan, a dowry for the dead, if you, brother, wanted a bride. Who's to say desire won't outlive us? In the Lowe's Plateau, the poorest parents weave the wives from straw, trusting the chemistry of dirt. There's wisdom in a match like that. Okay, thank you. Thank you. We are going to have the good fortune to start off hearing Romeo read his poems. Romeo Oriogan is the author of Sacrament of Bodies and The Gathering of Bastards, a finalist for the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry. He is the winner of Alice Faye de Castanola Prize, the Nigerian Prize for Literature, and the Julie Sook Award. Oriogan's poems have appeared in The New Yorker, Poetry, American Poetry Review, and others, a lot of others. He's also received fellowships and support from Monson Arts, Harvard University, the Hutchins Center for African and African American Research, and the University of Iowa. A juror for the 2024 Neustadt International Prize for Literature, he currently serves as an assistant professor of English at Florida Atlantic University. Please welcome Romeo.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, I have to look at the time, so I think I'm going to start this reading with just a little story, especially because I know I'm reading, but another way, we're also celebrating Natalie's very beautiful new book. I came to the US in 2018, and back home in Nigeria, I have a very British education, so to speak. And a lot of the books that I studied or poetry that I read were in that light. So Seamus Heaney, Wordsworth, and poets of that nature, Alice Oswald, and British and African, and sometimes Caribbean poets like Walcott and Lorna Goodison, whose words and world also spoke to mine. And coming to the US, I discovered a whole new poetic tradition. It's not to say I didn't know it existed, or that I haven't read poets from the US before, but suddenly I found myself in this place and I had to understand what was going on. And one way of doing that was also reading poets who were writing from the margin, or what I really don't think anyone, in a way, writes from the margin because we write from the center of our lives. But what society considered and still considers the margin. And one of the books I found was Natalie's, I think, a Facebook? Yeah. Yeah, and it has stayed with me since then to now. And it was such a pleasure to have her sign it before the reading. And that book has stayed with me for, I think, about 6 years or so. It has also taught me so much, whether it's about language, but also about, like borders are a language also. A lot of borders are languages. They speak different languages, but they also, in a way, embrace us and give us hope. It's just a privilege to read with you, and it's also a privilege to celebrate your new book, and I wish you all the best in the world. Yeah. So I'll be reading from my sophomore collection, The Guardian of Bastards. It's a book that was my thesis at Iowa and suddenly became a collection on the world. It's still something that surprises me, but in a way, I think it's always good to have more poetry in the world, especially now. I'll start with the very first book very first poem in the collection, and it's called It Begins with Love. In the fishing village, a man whispers, "Let no body bloated and gone find its way to my boat." He gives thanks to the wild, to the ants running from his sandals, to the vultures standing over the roadkill. Romeo, the day begins with love, I tell you. After a long night, after the rain, after the sleep of hibiscus, the world opens its hand to sunlight. There is time for everything. For the child down the street struggling with his clarinet, for the laborer kissing his wife's belly, for the newborn saying color for the first time. It begins with love, I tell you. Even prayers. And I have stood in the middle of a field amid the gaze of antelopes. I have prayed for thunder, a rod on my head. I, who have lived for 10 months without a friend, whose sole fear is the world so full of love, so full of loneliness. I have panicked, wondering if to hold a drowned body is to hold a part of myself. And from across the open field, we hear it, a fisherman's rescue call, another body washed out of the river. We run toward it. It begins with love, I tell you, even burial, the hand covered with sand, a crown of seaweed on the head of the dead. I walk to him, a song lifts me. O me, spare us in death, spare us in life. In the strangeness of villages I suffer. What else is there to do? Thank you. So this book, in a way, it's a kind of like hasty summary of the journeys that I have gone through in my life. So I'm bisexual, and in 2017, such a long time ago now. Time is such a crazy thing. Well, in 2017, I won a prize, and a lot of my poems went viral back home in Nigeria. And I had a lot of people saying crazy things about me and death threats, and I had to leave home. And so a lot of those poems are poems of moving through cities and moving through borders, until coming to the US, and also moving through cities in the border, in the US also. But a lot of those poems are just me reflecting on the cities that I move past or travel past. So this is called Cotonou, and Cotonou is a city in the Republic of Benin, which is one of the countries that's very close to Nigeria. This is called the meeting place. In some folklore, birds would always meet at the edge of a town. It was how they knew they were on a journey to save themselves from the loss of a season. At the intersection of 3 busy roads, 2 buses broke down and spilled us out, humans tired of journeys. Across the road, we watched the beauty of a palace. I smoked and wondered how many days of sweat went into the earth to produce such beauty. While I was smoking, I met a man called Trolley, named for his expertise in flinging humans across borders. His work of terror suffers in the coldness of brothels across Bamako, across Tripoli, across Mauritania, and across the red sands of Kayes. He watches girls drink gin on the sidewalk. I asked him, "Do you feel shame?" He answered, "I desire beauty. In its pursuit, there is no end, only ruthlessness." The road sang a dirge. The girls danced their sadness. There on the road, there is not home. I looked into his eyes and saw the terror of exploitation. A leaf fell from a tree nearby, and I was reminded of the endless movement of the world, of the girls dancing, of the sadness of my fingers obeying the call of my body's addiction to nicotine. As a bird sang of leaving the world as it is, a terror, a war we're still living in. Thank you. Okay, I think I'm gonna read just 3 more poems so I can leave enough time. Yeah. Because I'm also excited to hear Natalie read. So this is me just fanboying. This is called Uida. So Uida is also, it's a small town in Benin Republic also. And a lot of the enslaved people who ended up in the US and also in the Caribbean came past through Uida. So it currently has an exhibition or an artwork that's called the Dove No Return, which is when Black people walk through that part of the town. They're not expected to come back again because they get kidnapped and put on a ship, and some are also sold, or we are also sold. Oida. In the house of pythons, a man met his fear in snakes wrapped around his neck. The man, a tourist from rural Michigan, has come to experience Africa. The man said, "The task is to understand the land and not to claim it. There is history in the crash of waves, and in the water we're reminded every name we know is written in a language that came through the arrival of ships, through the betrayal of water, and in a language that would never be ours." Alone in the afternoon, I wondered if this land, also called the Door of No Return, still recognizes the sound of whips, the clang of chains, the moment blood and sand met on the hottest day of the year. And I ran into the coolness of water, which means I ran into the safety of water, which means I ran into the violence of history. One of the things about leaving home is that you realize a lot of people also leave home, right? At the point of leaving, there's always that moment of fear of what becomes possible, especially when I have never left Nigeria until my late 20s. So it was a world I knew, and it was a world I knew well because I traveled around the states that made up my country. So leaving home, there was that fear of understanding what the world was about. A lot of people in Africa would always tell you Nigerians are very loud people. And we're also very, very proud and very able to speak up for ourselves. So there was that fear of, would that still be possible in a place where the language and the people were strange to you? There was also the very real fact of what does it mean to find community in your 20s. I don't know how many of you moved to a city or are new to the city, but you'd realize that when you're a full-blown adult, making friends becomes very difficult. So that was part of my fear. But the interesting thing is that when you're a stranger in the world, there's also a lot of strangers who, funny enough, become your friends. And if one is lucky enough, you find a family. So in Ghana, I found a lot of young Africans, also very young African Americans who came back to Ghana that period, searching for the root of their own lives, so to speak. And a lot of us became friends. So this is one of the poems I wrote about us just hanging out by the sea and, looking at the world. And this is called The Sea Dreams of Us. Before the sea became my journey, it was love. It was folktales. It was our origin staring at us. It was our shadows. Then the ships of migration came, reminding us that years back, people left in canoes loaded with hope, with spices, seafarers who navigated water, holding stars in their bosoms until the sky became road. We never saw them. We only heard the rumors, only heard that they grew wings at the world's end, becoming ancestors, becoming what we hear in the water at night. I am telling the story to a girl in Accra, sitting before the sea, watching boats named for souls who grew wings. She laughs over her beer, saying, I was once the day, I was once hope, maybe love. I have given up my country to be here, to be by the seaside, where what looms over me is uncertain. I have committed no offense except to love a man, which I know is the word fear, for what burns the world quicker than desire. There is no rest in exile. There is only the road echoing in blood, the road echoing in water, and we know it, both of us. Even when drunk, home is our breath. The girl laughs at the sea, saying, our bodies are countries outside of borders. We watch the night, the return of boats, the sky above Accra, the horizon beckons, the ship waits with our journey. What have you given up? I ask her. Exile is also silence, she says. We walk to the sea. What story I carry lives inside of me. What story I cannot tell lives inside of me also. As the ship departs, I stare at it, wondering who will tell my story, who will give me wings, who will make me fly. Thank you. Okay. I have time for just very two short poems, and that'll be all. Okay. I'm going to read a very interesting poem. My first year in the US was strange. It was strange in the sense that, one, I had no idea people live like this. There's like a lot of American movies in the world, right? It's part of the American soft power, where you get bombarded with a lot of American images and say, that tells you this is how the world should be. And that also tells you, if you want to embrace civilization, this is what you should do. When I came here, I also realized that loneliness in America is different than every kind of loneliness I have experienced in the world. It's a loneliness that actually cuts through the bone. And so this is a poem I wrote, I think, my second month in America. So it's called All Winter, I Had No Love. All winter, I had no love. Though there was the frozen lake, I walked around 3 times every day, like a faithful pilgrim who had stumbled upon a saint's grave, and in that shock of worship was unable to let go. All day, I thought of prayers and then discarded them. The world itself was becoming small. I stood on a balcony in Athens, looking at the bronze of a racehorse, the raised point of his nostrils still filled with smoke. I have seen every beauty from the loneliness of my heart. I have walked in dreams into a market in Ouagadougou, and on the street where a French house was falling apart, I haggled with a woman for the bleached call of a white hog. I had no use of it, except to understand what becomes of us when we're left alone. Still alone, I said to myself, there is nothing as familiar as cruelty. Even exile, even love understands its shadow. And in the garden of light, among snowmen, a little plastic Jesus blossomed into the night like tenderness, like a stalk of wheat forgotten by time, and I plucked it. Walking home with that figure of Jesus, I imagined angel after angel traveling beside me, and from above, I imagined a song. I have known joy only to suffer when it's gone. I have seen the hawk cycle in the sky, seeking for the end of its own hunger. And though my soul was frail, I kept walking toward the end, toward the house where my desire and my longing kept the walls warm. I think one of the things people don't talk about exile, it's the guilt that comes with living home, especially when you're part of a community that's still haunted, and where a lot of people are still trying to survive, right? So there's a moment of living where you feel you have to live to survive. And after a while, there's like this very, very real crushing feeling of guilt, right? It's that you have so much abundance, and then you look back and you see a lot of people having so little room also to maneuver what it means to be alive. So a lot of my friends left home, but they left in a very different way. Like, I mean, I came through a plane and came to the US and found my way to school, and now I teach, which it's a story of its own. But there were friends of mine who went through the Sahara Desert and went through the Mediterranean Sea and stayed in a lot of like half or refugee houses in Italy until they became legal, which is also another crazy thing about certain human beings who are illegal and who's legal, and it blows my mind that we still live in a world like that. I mean, but this is a phone call from exile, and it's about a phone call I received from a friend of mine. I remember your face, veteran of the Mediterranean, of sea crossings, veteran of boats. I listened in stillness as you talked to me. I do not say to you, my guilt is America. I listen to you talk of charity, the act of begging for food in an Italian city, the disappointment of exile. What duty is asked of me other than to witness, other than the uselessness of my craft, my poetry? Quiet like the days after the defeat of freedom, I go into my room. My plants mock me in their own splendor. Once, when we were little, shielded from the brutal reality of roads, we walked the woods singing to the birds. We played on concrete verandas. You said the world welcomes all to its own journey, and we have walked, and we have traveled, and we have walked. And now you call me again. I, who is ashamed of my comfort, do not answer. Weeping into my plant, I say, grow in my shame. It is night time, and I must go to sleep, wondering what refugee camp you will sleep in tonight. What ancestor will come like a dog to lie at your feet. I do not pray for you. I also do not pray for me. I only lie in my own shame. I only wait for sleep to come. Thank you.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you. I don't know how. Wait, I think I got it. Okay. Sorry. If I move it forward, it doesn't. Yeah, Romeo. What a terrific reading. And I'm sure I'm not alone, and really looking forward to reading so many more of the poems. So it's a good opportunity for me to remind you guys that Tombolo Books is out front, our wonderful indie bookstore. Thank you to Tombolo, and you will be able to buy Romeo's book and also Natalie's. So I really look forward to reading more of your poems. Thank you for that reading. And gosh, I was struck by the poignancy, the overlap. I was thinking, as maybe many of us in this room have thought about Helene and Milton, and even all the imagery that you have with water is sort of overlaying some of what I'm thinking about, even a totally different domain and area, but your images are just so very evocative. It took me back to just a year ago in Western North Carolina. Now we have the delight to hear Natalie Scenters-Zapico read from her new book. So excited about that. Natalie is a fronteriza from El Paso, Texas. I'm sorry about the pronunciation. Her latest book is My Perfect Cognate, published by Kenyon Press in 2025. She's also the author of two previous collections, Lima, Limón, which is also Kenyon Press in 2019, and The Verging Cities, which was published by Colorado State University in 2015. Winner of the Yale University's Windham Campbell Prize in 2021, she has held a Ruth, Lilly, and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation. And that was given in 2018, which is wonderful. A Lannan Literary Fellowship in 2017 and a CantoMundo Fellowship in 2015. Her latest poems have been published or are forthcoming in the Paris Review, the New Republic, Kenyon Review, Colorado Review, the New England Review, the Georgia Review, and more. She's an assistant professor of English and director of the Michael Kuperman Memorial Poetry Library at the University of South Florida. Please welcome Natalie.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us this evening for an event of poetry. I am really excited to give kind of my first real reading from this new book here at the Dalí. It feels kind of appropriate because I feel like in many ways, I've always feel like an odd connection to Dalí because my work, people always say, is very surreal. And yet I always have had this problem where I'm like, no, but that actually did happen that way. It's not surreal, but I mean, that's great that you think that my life is so surreal. I also want to thank Romeo for sharing the stage with me tonight and for your incredibly kind words. You are a poet of tender-hearted language and a vulnerability that I admire deeply. And so thank you so much for creating that space for us to be vulnerable here together tonight, all of us. Thank you, Romeo. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to read poems from my third book, which is called My Perfect Cognate. And some people, know this from taking, language classes. A cognate is a word that is the same, right, across two languages. And it's a strange word because there are true cognates, which means that they're the same and they mean the same thing, and then there are false cognates, which they're the same word, but they mean completely different things. And I was really interested in exploring this idea of the cognate after I had my son, because I felt like I was totally lacking a language for the experience that was the first year after having my son. And I was suffering from postpartum depression. I was missing home tremendously. I'm originally from El Paso, Texas. I felt extremely lost also with this new baby in this like very different cultural spot where I'm living now. And I felt like the two languages that I'm fluent in, which is English and Spanish, just seemed totally insufficient to navigate it. And so I wrote this collection as a way to lean on both languages and play with both languages and try to explore what we can create when we blur the lines between those languages. This is language on paper. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Mother, and the Word was with Father, and I learned of violence through the Word. There was the Word in Spanish, and there was the Word in English, and at times they were the same word. Other times, the word did not mean the same to Mother as it did to Father. I never thought to learn more words, different words, from other mothers, other fathers. As a child, I only knew to speak the family words. As a child, I saw a stone, but did not think the word stone. As a child, a stone was an image made through fingertips. I write poems, and each word is a little knife I wield on the page to get back to the image of the stone. Am I too abstract? Perhaps. Still, can you hear the rain wash the wild and brown stone that lives in the quiet of my mind? No, I'll try to describe it. In the failure of the word, in the buried night, my baby screams toward the shut door to get closer to me. I wake for him. In the failure of the word, he screams, not knowing the word to bring me closer. He screams, and in his screams, I understand he wants closer. I bring him to my breast. We get close to each other without a word. With a finger, I wipe his pink gums and feel him silent. I whisper in his ear, my perfect cognate. He smiles, but does not understand. Thank God he does not yet understand. These words of empire are bees in the dry heat of summer, how they've stung me, how they sting, how they vibrate my larynx open, how I thought I was speaking, how it was their buzz and amber honey that moved my body through this world of words the whole time. Okay, another series that I have in this collection are these, I call them falso cognato poems, in which I use false cognates, but I also use like a lot of versions of like incorrect Spanish and incorrect English to create different meanings as a part of that. So falso cognato, if you speak Spanish, just grammatically that's like incorrect. It should be cognato falso, right? So falso cognato. Language is a mirror I never tire of looking into. Every day I fall headfirst into its red. Spanish is a trap, English is a diversión. One makes me the most beautiful woman. The other tells me to shut my snout, ugly dog. It's no one's falta I feel regalo in one and buy my groserias with the other. English and Spanish hold hands and ask me to appreciate them more. I look into language's mirror for a perfect reflection. I get the cognates right by getting them all wrong. I'll only buy a mirror if it makes me skinny mini. I can't imagine holding my reflection without making sure it doesn't give me a jowl. My mind won't stop humming. I blame all this language I don't know how to speak running mangled in my head. I'm no villain. I'm willing to mediate between Spanish and English, so they'll remember if they ever stop yelling. that portraits tend to favor the dead. This poem is called Sentimental Evening. And I guess Helen asked us to say some notes, I guess, on the poem. This draft started actually when I was in the hospital. I have like on my phone notes app. So drafting can happen anywhere. Sentimental Evening. The pewter moon's eyebrowed guise circles a picture of my son. A Windex tear falls to my son's cheek, and I know we will never fully know one another. Message after message asking, how is the breastfeeding going? Let me tell you, not great at all. Everywhere, advice to make the milk come. Plums, fenugreek, blessed thistle. This morning, each stream of water falling from my shower head was a knife ready to gut me. The pewter moon's smile wants to eat me whole. Online, strangers tell me to love my postpartum body. They say, you are tiger, you are zebra. I am desperate to return to the numb feeling of the surgical theater, the sound of the doctor mispronouncing my full name. In the mail, a medical bill worth more than a pickup truck arrives. It arrives before the state gives my son a social security number, a birth certificate, a sign of arrival. Even at my most animal, I am the price of my bearded belly, the price of my crying breasts, the price of being split, excavated, vacuumed, and stapled shut. Something that was really difficult for me to navigate when I had my son was that, especially as a poet, as a writer, was that suddenly it was like I had zero alone time. There was just no alone anymore. And I missed it tremendously. And I'm very lucky that my husband understands this and understood this. And so I would go sometimes on walks by myself, which were very sacred to me. But the guilt I felt just on those walks was like, I can't explain it. And it was just a walk. I mean, it's crazy to me. I don't know. Again, I think it's, sometimes the depression, anxiety, right? It messes with your brain. But this is matrescence. I stomp my feet at Muscovy ducks that waddle in my path and push my hair high, high into a yellow claw. I smile at the high school boys who throw rocks at the crib I keep hidden between my eyes. To the boys, I am just another absent-minded mother. The fathers here use 20-gauge shotguns to kill the Muscovies. Ducks, they say, are uglier than sin. No one would ever guess that like a duck, I bit a man once for sport. For sport, I'd bite a man again just to feel a winner. I bit a man for sport like a father shoots a duck with a shotgun in the evening rain. Send the fathers out to hunt me too. Tonight, the sky is a hell I long to plunge into, and earth is a heaven I hope to scale like a wall. I chew my loneliness like a Muscovy duck does a slice of Wonder Bread. I've tried to die my whole life, but now I rock the crib between my eyes to feel the pressure of living. At home, I have a child I prayed for, cried for, went under the knife for, and I feel guilty, very guilty, for being a mother alone on this walk without her son. So I'll probably just read 2 more poems is that okay? I've got time? I'm good? I do? Okay, great, sure. You heard it, guys. I have time for 3. Okay, so I'm going to read a poem. So I have the falso cognato poems, and then I also have a series of en cognato poems, which are all poems that use perfect or true cognates throughout. So this is en cognato. I eat cereal from a $2 McDonald's glass. Cadmium-laced red Ronalds dance up and down to inaudible musica. McDonald's will buy the glass back for $3, but why bother? Ronald, can you find your way to my kitchen, or do you need a mapa? The stench of ripe berries from the refrigerador is comforting. We only eat orgánico now. In another life, someone broke all my carro's windows, stole a book of cheques, and spit on the driver's seat. Now, I only have to worry about the shooting up the block from my house at the Alamo Motel. Now, I only have to worry about someone else's bad life. What is violencia to me now? Is all this comforting? I've never felt more uncomfortable in my life. My boss says she's not my boss. Okay, jefa. She calls and calls at all hours, and I automáticamente answer the teléfono like when I needed horas waiting tables to make renta. My boss doesn't care about the bebé on my hip or the pot of broth boiling on the stove. Vapor clouds my jalousie windows, so I turn a metal knob to let the vapor from outside cloud them more. This is paraíso. A home, food in the pantry, a boss who says she's not my boss, and a bebé crying for more formula I have plenty of. This is paraíso. This is paraíso. Who knew paraíso was so radiante, so damn bright? So the other part of this is also in this collection deals a lot with where I'm from, the nostalgia, which is El Paso, Texas, which is right on the U.S.-Mexico border, and is sister cities with Ciudad Juárez, Chihuahua, Mexico. And they used to be one city that was literally split in half when it was decided that the Rio Grande or Rio Bravo, depending on what side of the border you're on, would mark the border. And so it used to be one city, El Paso del Norte, and then it was kind of split in half. And I grew up very much crossing from city to city as though you were going to one part, like a different part of your own city, right? But you have to cross an international boundary to do that. And I've seen so many different iterations of kind of what border security has been. So El Paso, Juárez was one of the first cities, major cities along the border that had a border wall put up. This is pre-Trump. And it's sort of now was like used as like, this is the example that we need to have across the border. And also, I mean, when I was a kid, you didn't even need a passport, right, to cross. It was until after September 11th that was put into place. So it's like all these different kind of heightened ways of thinking about borders. And so this poem is about that, and it is about my kind of some of my childhood with that. So let me see here. This is Pledge Allegiance. I tap, tap, tap the window while my mother smiles and mouths, tranquila. I tap, tap the glass, my mother a fish I'm trying to summon. I tap until a border agent says stop, until a border agent shows me the gun on her belt. I thought myself a movie star, blowing kisses at the children selling chiclets on the bridge. My cruelty from the backseat window caught on video, proof I am an American. My childhood was caught on videos border agents deleted every 3 months. The drug-sniffing dogs snapped their teeth at my mother detained for her thick accent, a warp in her green card. My mother who mouths, tranquila. My mother's fingers dark towers on a screen for the Bio-10 scan. Isn't it fun, says the border agent. The state takes a picture of my mother's left ear. Isn't it fun? I tap, tap, tap the glass and imagine it shatters into shiny marbles, a marble like the one I have in my pocket, the one I squeeze so hard I hope to reach its blue swirls I wish were water I could bring to my mother in a glass to be near her. Friends, Americans, countrymen, lend me your ears. But only the border agent replies, do you know the Pledge of Allegiance? She points to a flag pinned on a wall. I do. So I stand and pledge to the country that says, it loves me so much. It loves me so much. It wants to take my mother far away from me, far away to the place they keep all the other mothers to sleep on rubber mats and drink from rubber hoses. Don't worry, says the border agent. We will take good care of your mommy. My mother mouths, tranquila. Her teeth 2 rows of gold I could pawn for something shiny like the border agent's gun. Friends, Americans, countrymen, lend me your ears so I can hear my mother through bulletproof glass, so I can hear her over the roar of American cars crossing this dead river by the wave of an agent's pale hand. So I'll finish with the last poem in the book, which has to do with my nostalgia for home. And one of the things that I started doing during the pandemic when I first moved here, but I was really missing El Paso, was you can actually watch live stream like video footage of different border bridges in El Paso. You could do this right now, any of you. And it's really, I was like deeply disturbed by it, and also it was oddly comforting for me. I don't know, I had a really complicated relationship with it. So this is a tiny nest of paper. Is all I ask for, a glint of copper wire for tummy time. I want to have a baby, but I want the baby to be all mine. Can a human being ever belong to another human being? Perhaps, if only for a time. Belong. I belonged nowhere, and I wanted company in the flicker of night. When I'm homesick, I pull up live video footage of people crossing the Santa Fe Bridge by foot. A man in a Dodgers hat, a woman dressed up and down in the interlocking G's of Gucci, the flash of a girl's bright blue hair. How easy it is to give into one's nostalgia. How quickly I become no different than the border agent in a concrete room in a city far away who watches strangers cross from one country to the next. What I wouldn't give to be a stranger, but nostalgia makes us surveillors of all we want and cannot have, of all we had and lost. Today, I lost a baby. I hold the pain, a cold, jagged stone under my tongue. I delete my longing for the nest, the copper wire. I do not mourn. What right did I have to yet another human being? Maybe the child was always a longing in my mind. I zoom in on strangers crossing the bridge, their pixelated faces, abstractions of the people they are in real time. What right did I have to mother yet another human being? The loss of this little never was or would be, my body's failure to carry a perfect cognate in my mind. Thank you.
Natalie, thank you so much. Wow, what a reading. That was just really terrific. Another round of applause for both of our poets, please. We will segue into our Q&A, but first I'd like to introduce Dr. Hank Hine, our director of the museum. Thank you so much, Hank, for being here and for the way you've supported our poetry program. This museum would be nothing without Dr. Hank Hine. Yeah. That was just a terrific reading. Romeo's was terrific. I know you all have some questions. Let's hear them. Just raise your hand and please wait until Sumaya comes around with the microphone, okay? And the reason for that is then those of you who are tuning in to our live stream, first, thank you for that. We're happy to have you also joining us. They'll be able to hear the questions and answers as well, so.
Romeo, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Your words are just, the pain comes through so beautifully. It's incredible. But I also take back a little bit of hope in them as well. And I was just wondering if that's intentional of what you're doing. And then I have a two-parter, sorry. Are those words coming to you in English? And did you write English growing up, or did you have to learn that recently?
Should be.
Test it now.
Test it? Yeah, it should be good.
I didn't know how to answer the first one. So Nigeria is an English-speaking country. English is our official language, and we were, that tiny rock called England actually did a number of a lot of places, including my homeland. So, and it's quite funny because I get this question a lot, and it's a very interesting question because I don't write in any other language or actually speak. So I speak just English and Pidgin English, which is, yeah. And the first question, I don't know if it's deliberate. If I think I'd answer that with a story. When I was in Boston, which was my arrival point in the U.S., there's this magazine at UMass Boston called Consequence that did an issue with Iraqi female poets. So they wanted to do an issue where an American poet would respond to a prompt, and Iraqi poets would respond to a prompt, which I think is a good gesture because I truly think poetry is a way of always moving through divide and getting to know each other well, which is what we should be doing as human beings. But the American poets were writing about war and the atrocities of the war in Iraq and, so on and so forth. And the Iraqi female poets were writing about love, what it means to love, what it means to love through terror and war and a war they didn't ask for and they didn't sign up for, but it came to them. And this was, I think, in 2018. Someone told me that story, and it stayed with me even throughout the way I write and everything. That even, within the most terrible moment of our lives, there's still tenderness. It's interesting because if you also look at social media and everything, you see Palestinians who are going through something so crazy, like as a genocide, and you still see people playing and children playing and everything. So it's what it means to be human, that we can go through so much darkness and still find so much light. Right? And when I write, I try to hold on to that. So I think that's the only thing that makes us completely human. And I honestly fight to still hold on to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Would you like to answer also? Would you like to address that? Okay. Another questions.
This is a question. Can you hear me? Yes. Question from Romeo. It's really three. I heard you ask. No, wait. I heard you ask the question, who will give me wings? Yeah. Who will make me fly? Okay, and I want to know, have those questions been answered? Number one, just number one. And then the other is, what centers you? In the midst of all of this, what centers you?
Oh, thank you so much. That's such a beautiful question. Thank you. And thank you for coming to listen to poetry. It's I think the first question, it's interesting. It was also interesting to hear you talk about your son because I have a daughter who's about 2.5 years old.
He's about to turn 3
Oh, mine
in November.
Oh, mine is turning 3 in April next year. But when you say what centers me, it's actually watching my daughter walk around, seeing that innocence. She lives with her mom in Rhode Island, and I talk to her almost every day, and I see her twice in a month. And it's interesting to see so much innocence, and I think it's also something I was listening to your poems, like the innocence of babies, and somehow it's like until I had my daughter, I was always very anxious about what the world means for me, but there's that center. I know other people have different centers, and you don't have to have a child to find yours, but that just happened to be mine. And like watching my daughter being born was the first time I stopped having anxiety. Like I always have like really intense panic attacks, and I've never had one since then. So that's something I cherish. In terms of like who will give me wings and who will make me fly, it's actually in reference to a folktale, and I think it's also like an African American folktale, which we also have back home, where people fly and just, So we also have that back home also. It's a folktale about people going on to discover the world and found that the world is flat, and then they flew, and we never saw them. But I have never been home since I left. Yeah, I've never been home. When I left home, my siblings were still in Nigeria, and now they're no longer in Nigeria. So they're everywhere in different parts of the world. My elder brother's in St. Kitts. My younger brother and elder sister in the UK, and I know, and my siblings have kids and they're married, and I never went to their weddings. I've never met their kids, and they've never met mine. So I think that's a question I'm still trying to figure out an answer for. I don't know the answer yet, but I think I know the parts. I'm not still sure what that part is, but but it's an interesting question. Thank you.
Natalie, would you answer? Would you like to address that also? What centers you? It's a wonderful question. It's a great question.
What centers me? That is a really difficult question, I think, for me to answer, if I'm being perfectly honest. On the one hand, of course, like, I also think that my son centers me in a lot of ways, in the sense that he, for a very long time, writing and poetry was sort of my entire world. And I was so deeply enmeshed in it that, and I mean like in the act of reading and writing and critical study constantly. And I think it came from a real chip on my shoulder that I had, that I grew up in a city and came from a city and was educated in a city and in a part of the country that is often not considered literary and not considered intellectual. And so I was like, oh, I am going to show you not just that my part of, that the border is literary and does have a rich literary history, but also that I know my stuff and your stuff, right? Like that's kind of where I came from. And it was, both great in that I was very driven, and obviously now I have a lot of language for talking about these things, which is a real blessing, professionally, right? But there's a point, for me at least, where it was like, but this cannot be it. This cannot be it. I need a more balanced life. And I kind of decided in many ways to start leaning back into what brought me peace growing up, which is, a lot of it is this idea of family, right? And so for me, it was starting a family of my own. And that's not necessarily, of course, for everyone. You don't have to have that. But, if I'm being honest of where I am, that's was a part of it for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Hi, guys. Romeo, thank you for your beautiful words and for being here. I'm excited to dive into your collection. Natalie, I have a question for you. So, deep in the acknowledgements, you thank students for the possibilities of hybrid lenguas beyond Spanglish as a radical means to break English through reimagination. And one thing that is another thread throughout the book is your interrogation of the dictionary, right? And this meaning of the multiple meanings of cognate and agnate, right? And the mother and the father and descending. Can you not explain, but speak a little bit on your interrogation of the dictionary, kind of what was the idea behind that there, and what, are you trying to break English? Yes? Are you creating
Always,
hybrid
always,
language?
Camilo, always. I'm always trying to break English. I think, yeah, that I can answer no problem. Always. I think, so Camilo, my advisee, is really putting me on the spot. Former advisee, graduate now, is putting me on the spot here. So first I want to say that deep in the acknowledgements, I do talk about my students, specifically here in Florida. And Camilo, you are one of these people, for sure, that I'm referencing when I say that. In that my students here, especially my, Latino Spanish-speaking students in both my undergrad and my graduate level classes, really are doing innovative work in rethinking kind of what it means to be bilingual in a country that has a history of colonization through many different languages, right? And what does it mean to carry that? And one of the beautiful things about it is all the different ways that through colonization, people have sort of survived and endured through breaking the Spanish language, right? And making it their own. And then also on top of that, in a US context, breaking the English language and making it their own. And so one of the questions that I think I've had since my first book has always been, how can we use that as a vehicle, as a craft element, right? So how are we using, it's not just, there's one thing, and there's nothing wrong, right, with saying, like, I want to capture the way that my grandparents speak, the way that my parents speak, like, that's beautiful too. But how do we also, like that, and use it as a craft element that we can complicate what we are doing in the English language and provide kind of different voices, right? And then as far as the OED goes, I've been both fascinated and I have beef with the OED, I think, since my first book. So I'm always I love spending time with the OED because it's just bizarre and wonderful. And if you have access to the OED, spend some time. It's great. It's great. It's disturbing sometimes. Like, what? But it's wonderful. Yeah. So I'm always doing that, I feel like.
Natalie, I have a follow-up question to that. So in addition to vocabulary, weaving together the two languages within the same poem or whatever, can you give some other examples of ways that maybe some of your students or maybe you, what other sorts of things would you say, maybe fooling with syntax? How do you otherwise help or get those languages to wrestle with each other? Are there other ways other than vocabulary? Is it rhythms? Is it, what would you?
Yeah. So this is a question that I've had, I think, for my 3 books. I'm always kind of like trying different things with it. So my first book, I was very young, and I think I had this very scrupulous idea of like, I will only use like Spanish if it feels like something that just doesn't translate into English. Like that was sort of my mode. And that's, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't, that's one logic to operate through a poem or through a collection. My second collection, Lima Limón, suddenly I started using a mixture of both languages, and instead I really valued musicality. So the entire collection is really rooted in music and in the music that I grew up with. And so I didn't care, like, if it was better in one language or the other. It was like, which one sounds better? Like, in which language does it sound better? And so that's what I would value and what I would go for. For My Perfect Cognate, I got really deep into kind of more the linguistics of it. So I started thinking through, so not just like, this word or that word in English or Spanish, but also how do we construct Spanish sentences and phrases, but say that phrasing in English,
that's what I
and what
wondered.
happens when you do that, right? What is revealed both about the English language and about the Spanish language? What happens when you do that as a mode of translation from one to the other, or if it's just coming organically in that space? And of course, those of us that speak kind of forms of Spanglish, we know we do this all the time, right? But I was interested in like what happens when we really break it down.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And try to name it and try to like really play with it as a vehicle, right?
That's
like,
terrific. Yeah, thank you. Other questions?
I've got it. So I actually came here more. I'm not an academic. I'm a fiction reader. So I came more because I'm interested in kind of all of you, the people that come to see poetry, the people that write poetry. This is actually my first poetry reading, and I have to tell you,
welcome.
Well, I'm almost embarrassed to admit that, but I'm absolutely blown. Oh, are you okay? Yeah, no problem. Was it my question? I'm just kidding. But honestly, I'm sitting here and I'm absolutely blown away by your bravery, both of you. And I'm blown away to sit in a room and write it, or a book, a bus or whatever, to write it is one thing. But then to come here and look us in the eye and read your most intimate thoughts and your fears it's inspiring. And I guess my question for you guys is, have you ever gotten to a place where people have posed questions that brought you deeper than you were willing to go?
Oh, good question. This might be one of those questions.
I don't. So my very first poetry reading. So to your first coming to listen. I'll share you a story about my first poetry reading. It was in Ibadan. Ibadan is a city in Nigeria. It's one of the first cities in West Africa that had a university and all of that stuff. So they still have a very rich poetry tradition where younger poets go up and read and people critique you. It was also interesting to hear you talk about El Paso, because I don't have a bachelor's degree. And so when trying to come up and learn how to write poetry, I also do the same thing, which is read every single thing, and then try to show everybody that, hey, well, if your bachelor's degree, I can tell you what poetry is. So I went up to the university to read, and it was a poem about my mom. I lost my mom when I was 13, and it's a wound I still carry within me. And so I just went to the stage and read. It was a bad poem. It was a very bad poem. The intention was good. The craft was bad. And I was asked a question both on the intention and the craft. And my answer on the craft was also very wonky because I was trying to figure out what I was saying. But on the personal side, it was interesting because when I left there, someone walked up to me and said, your answer about your mom and why you wrote this poem is something I resonate with. And we became friends till this day. Like, the person is a writer, and she just completed her first fiction manuscript. But I share that to say a lot of times it's the, like with poems, it's just like opening doors. You don't get to choose who walk through. It's just open. You share it and it's open, and people walk through. And sometimes people walk in that doors because I kind of think it's the same for Natalie. But people walk in that door and they ask you questions and just like, what's this? But sometimes people walk in and they ask questions that make you go deeper because they're also searching for the same meaning that you've been searching for all your life, right? And I don't think poems are answers. I think when I was way younger, I always think that poems are answers, that we write from questions into answers. But I think that the years have taught me we write from questions into questions, right? And sometimes you read and it's a question, and someone in the crowd also who have the same question comes up, asks a question, And sometimes you guys just have a conversation, and the answer might just be what the person is seeking for. It might also not be, and that's fine. But again, it's just the beauty of sharing words. That's what it means to be human, and it's why we would defeat ChatGPT.
I think the only thing that I really, I guess, have to add is that, we started this evening with a quote by Lorca. And Federico Garcia Lorca, he has this whole theory and play of duende, right? And in his theory and play of duende, which was a lecture that he gave that's very, famous. Some of you might have read this lecture before. He talks about he's talking about flamenco dancing in particular, right, to his native Spain. And he's talking about how there are these women who study flamenco dancing their entire lives, and they are the most amazing kind of craft people. Does that make sense? Of they're artists at their craft. But that the woman who he has seen that dances the best flamenco, according to Lorca, was actually a much older woman who could barely dance. But it was the vulnerability with which she danced that changed him, right? And that this woman had duende, right? She had duende. She was vulnerable to everyone in the room. And I think about that often because I think, and he uses that as a way to talk to talk about poems and say that the best poems, it's not just about being a great craftsperson, it's also about being a vulnerable person. And so I always try to lead with that in my craft. So as much as I try, of course, know your stuff, but also you have to be willing to be vulnerable with people. It's also the only way that we can connect with each other is if we're vulnerable. I really believe that. So it can be challenging sometimes, but it's also where the real moments of beauty come from if you allow it, I think.
Such a good answer. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you both so much for sharing your works today. It was a privilege to hear them. I have a question for both of you. You both mentioned some very specific moments before each poem that were sort of the catalyst to those works. And I was wondering if you could speak on that process a bit. If you could mention, is it like a cork being pulled and it all comes out at once, or is it a seed being planted and you have to come back to it later? And do you have any advice of how we can make ourselves available to those moments?
Wonderful. So this is our craft question. We always have craft questions. So thank you. Thank you. No, it's so important. Thank you.
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule for that. I think it is, I really do believe that you have to be very disciplined and be writing and open to writing and gathering and collecting metaphor and image all the time. And if you're lucky and you have a great day, things will kind of come together and you'll sort of have an access point into a poem. But if you're not always working consistently, then you won't be ready to receive it.
And so for you, describe that work. What does it mean? Do you go to the same location, certain times of the day? Do you use only a number 2 pencil?
Okay.
Yeah.
So this has changed a lot over kind of my time of writing. When I was a graduate student, I was extremely disciplined in that I would write in the morning. Does that make sense? For several hours, and then I would go teach, and then I would go to class, and that was kind of my routine every day. And then you graduate and you have to get a real job.
Real world
and you
happens.
cannot do that, right? And so that was a huge wake-up call for me because I taught high school after that for several years. And you're teaching the entire day, so there's no way. So suddenly I had to like squirrel away time any place that I could. And 10, 15 minutes, I wasn't scrupulous. Like I was just like any time. And then at some point, that wasn't enough. And I started waking up really early, and this was advice that my mentor Dana Levin gave me that she gives often, which is to dedicate 90 minutes a day, and that can be doing anything, but it has to be poetry related. So it has to be your writing, your reading, or she also counts corresponding, right, with other poets.
Okay, good.
And I think that that's a good kind of model if you can keep it up, and it's a good goal.
I think Natalie has said almost 80% of everything. But yeah, I think it's different from person to person, from poets to poets, in that you find your own rhythm, what works for you. For me, I'm a very traditional poet. Like I envy poets who can experiment with language, who can experiment with form and go out there and do interesting things. For me, I'm kind of like wounded by the British. Like I still feel angry. So what it means to be a very narrative poet is to write poems that tell stories. And what does it mean to tell stories and also renew language at the same time? It means you have to collect, and part of collecting also. So when I was very young, my very first creative writing class is still my most important class, and it was by this poet who now lives in Canada, Jumoke Verissimo. And back then we were all in Nigeria, and she said, always get a notebook. Everything you would collect, every word, every language lives around you. So I always, like, even right now I'm with a tab, I'm listening to people, and some interesting thing, I'm going to write it down when I get to my hotel room. I'm always collecting words, I'm always collecting phrases. The ear has a very interesting way of listening to language. It also has a very interesting way of catching, like, phrases that just like, oh, why is this person saying this? And so I collect all those things, and then sometimes I don't use them, but what it teaches me is how language works. And so when I'm writing poems, I go back to those things. Some of them I bring them into the line, some of them I don't. I think Natalie talked about dictionaries. The other thing is no knowledge is wasted. It's if I don't know how many people. There's this book I'm always buying for everyone who's my friend. It's called The Prince of Tides by Pat Conroe. Everyone who's my friend ever have that book. It's not because of the main character. It's the main character's sister who's a poet. And she taught me something. She said, if you want to write about a bird, you have to read everything around it. And it's tedious work. But what it does is that it gives you the language to express what you want to express, right? And so that's what I also do. So I'm always in the library trying to figure out, oh, if this is a moment in history, then what are people saying? What are people wearing? What do they like? And in a way, you just, with discipline also, you just, yeah. So,
Those were both such good answers, and I love the idea of always collecting. I mean, absolutely. But I will take it even a step back. Back eons ago when I was in grad school, sometimes you're still faced with a blank page, and what do you do then? So invention work. It's as little as sitting at the table and doing brainstorming or free writing. Put yourself on a timer. You're gonna just write, and you're not gonna allow the critic to be on your shoulder. You don't care about grammar. You don't care about spelling. You just write, and you write whatever you think. maybe you think in terms of images. Maybe you've seen something in the day that you've collected that's an image. You could do a cluster. You could do it, put that in the middle of a spider web, whatever that image is, and then write off of it as fast as possible, and later go back and connect them. So those sorts of activities, invention work, I think they can be helpful too for some of us when, breaking it down to that early level can be sometimes helpful as well. Other questions?
Thank you both for everything. It was a wonderful reading. And I want to share with Natalie that I love El Paso.
Aw.
Been there many times. We went every summer. And your poem with the image of the tap, tap, tapping at the window brought back my own experience in an Irish Catholic American family crossing that border in the 50s and having one of the agents threaten to take my brother out of the back seat next to me.
Wow.
And it was a joke. This guy was making a joke. And the same thing with the mother as we approached the gates saying, she didn't say tranquilo, she said, be quiet, shh, just sit down, be quiet. So I wanted to share that with you, that I was very moved, and it embodies, just those few words embodies so much for me, and I'm sure for other readers, so thank you.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. I think we have time for just a couple more questions, probably.
This one's for Natalie. I had the opportunity to live in El Paso for about 1.5 years. By far one of my favorite cities in this country. It is beautiful. And talking about the border, it is an ugly scar on the land, just massive piece of concrete. But one of the other things, like all the beauty that's there, like the animals, the plants, even just the air and the weather, like the mirages that I've seen there are amazing. What have you connected with in your home city that comes out in your poetry that you miss the most? Like, I'm fascinated here because you are a native El Pasoan.
Great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are, it is like a very often overlooked thing, the way in which just the physical barrier of the wall affects so many species of plants and animals that are migratory too. And also a lot of the polluting of that land. In El Paso in particular, there's a lot of, and in Juarez, of course, there's all the maquilas when I was growing up, but now in El Paso, just outside of El Paso, they're putting in, all the AI, what are they called, servers and things outside. And so there's this way in which, I guess, I'm going about to answer your question. There's a way in which, to outsiders, oftentimes, desert landscapes, in particular, really dry desert landscapes like the Chihuahuan Desert, where I'm from, which, if you've never been, it makes, like Arizona look lush. Seriously, no joke. It is often perceived, or the experience of outsiders, that this is vacant land, that it is wasteland, it is scrub land. There's all of these terms that people use to diminish the life of the wildlife there, and in turn, the people that are native there. And I've always had a real connection with, I also grew up also like hiking in the Franklands and doing, even the hikes up like Mount Cristo Rey and doing that kind of stuff. And there's a way in which, if you're from there, the beauty can be really overwhelming. It's just looking for it, right? And being in it and a part of it, and not just viewing it from a car window, right? Which is the experience of a lot of people because of the heat. I've also, I guess, on a more like concrete level, have always been really interested actually in a lot of like the bugs and insects that are really important to desert landscapes, right? And oftentimes they are considered sort of dangerous and people don't, want to talk about them, but they're vital, right, to these landscapes. And they're also being displaced and destroyed. So it's a really complicated place, but there's a real relationship between the destruction of the land, the disrespect that people have for all of the wildlife that call that desert home, I believe, and then the way that we treat also the native people on those deserts, right?
Yeah, good answer. I think we have time for one more question. Someone have a question for both poets? Anybody? Well, wait, is there someone? Oh, yeah, in the back.
Hello.
Hello.
This is a question for both of you. The world of writing nowadays is, I'd say, for writers, submitting work is becoming more and more difficult. Literary contests and any kind of contest you'd like to enter, whether that's short fiction, poetry, in your case, is sort of plagued by people who have degrees and accreditation, and there's no room for anybody new to step in. So I wanted to ask what your publication journey was like, and what advice do you recommend for writers that aren't able to get in, like with a degree or have accreditation?
I think I'll just speak for myself. My publication, it's outside of the US and within the US. Back home, poets are still taught about we still talk about poetry as this very holy devotion, right? So poets are seen as the conscience of the nation, and almost like after journalism, it's the next frontier of what it means to resist. So publishing becomes, first of all, very rigorous because you have to be worth your salt. You have to know what you're saying. But on the other hand, it's a different pathway. But coming to the US, I've always, when people talk about degrees as a barrier, it's something, honestly speaking, I cannot relate with. And it's because I've been on both sides of the divide. Like I started sending my work when I was in Nigeria to journals in the US. And when I came here, I got my first book came out. My first book was signed before I went to the MFA. And so I think I was in my second year or first year when my first book came out. And
it's amazing.
Thank you. And I have stayed with my publisher for that long. The publishing my next book, I think in 2027. So I have just stayed with them. In terms of publishing, like with journals, I just send my work out. And again, it's the blindness of privilege, right? It's that I kind of like found this very lucky part and I have students who, like I teach in an MFA program now, and I see my students who are really talented writers, people who really have something important to say, and they have to like also pay to enter contests, with sometimes for rejections and all of that. And it's for me, it's still something I struggle with, if I'm being very, very honest.
Yeah.
It's something I struggle with because not just only that my path was different, but the way poetry is published back home and the way you get into the poetry scene is also very different. So I really don't know if I can honestly answer your question like 100%, but this is the best I can do.
Well, first, I want to just acknowledge that, especially in this country, so many of our literary magazines are often not funded or completely underfunded, and they, including by the universities that house them. And so many magazines are then put in a trap where, in order to keep going, they have to charge for submissions, and they have to run contests in order just to make up the difference. And everyone's working for free too, on top of everything. So it's literally just to put out, does that make sense, whatever, you know, the cost is. And I think that's a really, I do think that that's something that, you know, we don't contend with, and that we should probably contend with. That we have, you know, there's been a real lack of investment both in the nonprofit sector and in universities in literary magazines. And it affects the whole literary landscape and how then things are funded. So I want to just acknowledge that. And as far as like publishing things, you know, I started sending things out. I came into my MFA program never having published anything, not even in a magazine. And I felt like a huge chip on my shoulder about that. And I just started being very like regimented about it. And I would just, you know, I would put together a packet in a semester and send it out. And I would just sort of like rotate through and just be constantly sending things out. And I started small, you know, I started sort of with some small, like my publications were sort of in smaller magazines, and I started building a readership that way, right? I also started to really become invested in what it means to read and engage with other, like read literary magazines, and like who's publishing, what magazines did I like, figuring that out, reaching out to writers who then in turn, you know, maybe can support you in some way when the time comes. And I think that that's also part of it, is like realizing that it really is an ecosystem that, you know, if you don't know the poet, then probably you know someone who knows that poet. And so if you want to be a part of that world, you have to know that like you're entering into, you know, very tight-knit kind of community. And so you have to be a good member of that community in that way, I think. Yeah.
I also want to add something to that. I think and I see this a lot with very young poets who come into the scene. Very often people like overlook the very small journals.
Yes.
You know, the small journals that are run by people who really love poetry and who cannot give you the same name recognition as the Paris Review or the New Yorker or the New York Times and all that stuff. But sometimes that's where the real work begins, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just want to put that out there too, because I think also when you were saying, I was like, oh, a lot of my first poems in this country was in very, very small, very small journals, accounts that's run. I've forgotten her name, but there's this like very wonderful editor and poet who runs a poetry magazine called Account, and you know, so exactly as Natalie said, it will start from there and figure out, and there's also luck, which is a real thing sometimes. Like someone reads your stuff and reach out to you. Or a lot of the bigger publications I've gotten in my journey was someone who read my poem in a small magazine and then solicited, say, hey, do you have something to send to me? And yeah, so just wanted to add that. Yeah.
Those are important points, and absolutely with the small journals, because you know there's just a gazillion journals out there, and if you do get into a journal that maybe is a smaller journal, and you send your work out to the next level of journal, they may not even necessarily know that that's just a little small journal. You know, you need to sort of build it up that way and not let yourself get discouraged. But it can for certain be discouraging. But then you remember why you're writing, why you're doing it anyway, and hang on to that as you keep plodding through. There is I believe it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe her name is it Emily Stoddard? Do you know that list? Emily Stoddard, Stoddda. she puts together a wonderful list for people who are trying to send out books, because those can be very expensive, and you send to so many over so many years, it can really add up. But she'll make a list. She has a list that shows the journals that help people out with the fee, and either they're free or they have a lower fee than some of the other ones. So you might check out that list if you're sending a book out. But okay, well, unfortunately, we have to draw this to a close, but please go out and buy these books to read these wonderful poets. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Natalie and Romeo. Terrific reading. We hope to see you back in a month. So.